Starship, Elon Musk, his rival Bezos, and Richard Branson is, oh, they're just sending rich people to space. When you look at the numbers, this is soon going to be a reality for middle class people to go to space. And this is an incredible bit of news. So, yeah, I think that this is just an awesome topic that we should all be excited about going into the future.
Spring break on the moon is going to be out of this world.
Oh, absolutely.
Welcome to Your One Podcast, where future leaders take on the complexities of today.
Episode 25 now. And today, like every other day, I'm welcomed by the insightful minds of Micah McNeil, Felipe Segura, and Zachary Crilly. And what topics will we cover today? I'm glad you asked. We are going to start off with the absolute upending of the direct-to-consumer market and huge brands that have fallen off a cliff. Then we will get into the news about Julian Assange and him potentially getting a pardon. And so all of you concerned if free speech is alive and well, stay tuned. Then we will finish up with the latest on SpaceX and the potential costs of space travel, which are just insane numbers. But let's get started with the direct-to-consumer space. I'll go ahead and share my screen. So I thought this was especially interesting because this is where I work in, the industry I work in. But you can see that some of these are just doing absolutely terrible. Like Warby Parker down 75%, Allbirds penny stock now, Chewy down, Peloton, Purple, which is like a mattress direct-to-consumer company, and Stitch Fix down 85%. I think that this is just a huge turning of the market, and it really shows what consumers are valuing. But like, how hard is it to create sunglasses or shoes or a clothing kit? Like, that's becoming increasingly easy for any person to do and go online, look up distributors, manufacturers, and just completely copy them, which is the main reason. But it's like what Peter Thiel says in 0 to 1. A true business comes from creating something new and valuable that didn't exist before. And I feel like that's just not the case with these companies. But what do you guys think? Do you agree or disagree with my take here?
Yeah, I mean, I think you sort of hit it on the nail, where there's sort of three issues that I think direct-to-consumer businesses are struggling with. I think one is obviously scalability. Like, how do you scale out a simple, I guess, Warby Parker in this example, and Allbirds, right? And then what you have is this. It's such a growing market where it's like everyone's creating the new clothing brand, everyone's creating the new sunglasses. How do you scale those? So it's a very saturated and competitive market. And then I think the third thing is the rise in advertisement costs, right? We're all in this constant search trying to find or garner people's eyeballs to a specific product. And when that cost increases, as it has on like Google or Instagram or other social media platforms where this digital advertisement is coming from, you get sort of squeezed out, where most of your money has to be allocated towards retrieving these eyeballs from consumers. So I think those three things: scalability, bigger competition, and then advertisement increases in dollars, is sort of the issues that these direct-to-consumer businesses are falling into.
I do completely agree. Like, most of these companies got a bunch of funding and then just dumped it into Facebook ads, and all the investors were just seeing revenues double, triple, 10x. And then they just couldn't maintain that because of rising costs and not true organic customers.
It's the fact that these stock prices are dropping, or if they're leveling to more of a status quo level. Because during the pandemic, these brands were some of the biggest winners from that period of time, as retail got completely squished and customers were forced to stay at home and spend their consumer dollars online. And that pushed the price of these stocks up through the roof. As you both said, that wasn't a sustainable trend. And we see now people returning to shopping in person, or these platforms such as Amazon, Walmart, etc., really having built out their online strategy now that decreases the likelihood of these brands to capture customers and increases their customer acquisition cost. But look, there's always going to be a space for these players. People like to support small businesses. They like the products. I like Allbirds. I like these brands. There's going to be a room for them. Maybe they just flew a bit too close to the sun in COVID time.
Yeah. And I mean, there's also a huge proponent of this component of this that's just organic followers and being able to really have that customer without having to pay $50 to acquire them. So acquisition costs have just gone skyrocketing. And we've seen the rise in like one person brands where they just get a huge social media following and then monetize it, and their cost of acquisition is way, way down. So I think that trend is going to continue as well. Definitely a pretty crazy drop there.
Well, to your point, and for people who want to look more into kind of people who leverage their social media following or their popularity, just look at Prime Energy, the Kardashians and their makeup brand, just an aside to that, right? Those are brands that are taking off and don't spend too much on marketing, right? So,
but Julian Assange, let's get into it. So he's potentially getting a pardon from the United States, as he is in where is he? Zach, do you have more insights?
So for the people who aren't familiar with the Julian Assange story, maybe you've heard of WikiLeaks, which is his company. That's what he is the founder of. He's an investigative journalist of, does anybody know what his ethnicity is? He's Australian. Yeah, he's born in Australia. He started WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks is an amazing source of data. They have a wide variety of both government documents, commercial documents available. And it was a really new and innovative form of journalism where he said, we're just going to give all the information to the people and allow journalists from any institution or publication to come and interact with this data and transcribe it for people as they may. This, of course, put him on the radar of many people who did not want information to be made public to everybody in a free and open fashion. And what really is the straw that broke the camel's back was he published videos that showed American military personnel conducting drone strikes in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in the Middle East. And these drone strikes killed civilians, and that's why they were of interest to be published journalistically. But the US government then came out and said, you put armed service people at risk by showing the location of our personnel. So that allowed them to create a warrant for his arrest. The Ecuadorian embassy in London offered him safe harbor. He lived there for a number of years until recently they pulled out their support and British police arrested him, dragged him out of the Ecuadorian embassy, where he, side note, he had a love affair with Pamela Anderson for a number of years, which is interesting. Pulled him out and have extradited him to the US, where he's been for the last number of years. And many people that are for journalistic integrity, freedom of speech, freedom of press, argue that this is a direct assault on those freedoms and that he is in many ways the poster child for American hypocrisy as it comes to demanding freedom of press from our friends and allies across the world, but maybe not upholding those same standards here on our home turf.
I mean, I think they deliberately and outright kind of went against those standards. A vote just failed that you do not need a warrant for the federal government to access all of your communications. Basically the opposite of free speech and what Julian Assange stands for. So what are our thoughts on that? I mean, that's just a huge vote that completely goes against what we're standing for.
I don't know. I think if this was 20 years ago, I think most of the American public, and I think people who are soon to be younger, would have said, yeah, Julian Assange should be in prison. because he's betraying the United States and we need to trust the government and we can't put our troops at risk and whatnot. And I think a lot of people would have bought the argument. But I think that Julian Assange and what he represents, and to a certain extent Snowden, represents kind of the mistrust that people have to the government. I think we felt like we've been lied to. And some of these people now represent for us kind of, they are representative of finding the truth in journalism and whatnot. So yeah, I don't know. It's a tough situation, but I think that they just represent kind of the distrust of the government in today's times.
Yes, two separate issues, but a similar vein. For our listeners, Gavin is talking about the FISA, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which got reauthorized in Congress this week. The vote to reauthorize it was a pretty wide margin. It got past 273 votes to 174 no's. But what was even more controversial was an amendment that would have required authorities to seek a warrant when dealing with the digital footprint of American citizens. And that got tied 212 votes to 212 votes. And the tie got broken in the favor of not requiring that warrant. And why is this a problem? Because there have been some pretty landmark lawsuits recently that have attacked this law. Most notably, it's a law that Trump says was used to spy on his campaign. And that's what got a lot of press. But even beyond that, in these lawsuits, it's been exposed that this law has been used improperly by the FBI almost 300,000 times and has targeted racial justice protesters, January 6 suspects, among others. So what is this doing? This is saying it's giving the power to the federal government, these unelected officials in the intelligence agencies, to come and look into your phone and look into what you're doing without a warrant and without, I don't know what the onus is for probable cause, but without having a third-party judge saying, yes, you can look at Felipe's phone because we have this probable cause. Now, a lot of people say, hey, I like to live in a free and secure society. If this is the price that we have to pay, so be it. I have nothing to hide. And I get that. But I look back at our founding fathers, and especially the famous Benjamin Franklin quote where he says, if you trade your freedom for security, you will gain neither. And this is a great example of that. And it does weave into the Julian Assange conversation, because these people, Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, among others, have gone out of their way and have put their own future potential in risk. They've had to go running and fleeing to say these things are being abused at a massive, massive scale. And frankly, this is a topic that you won't likely hear about from other media platforms. So this is one that we wanted to highlight and share the importance of our digital freedoms being maligned through the failing of this law to pass.
Dropping the stats, dropping the news, Zach Crilly live. But honestly, I think Julian Assange would be up there with one of the most interesting people to have an interview with in the world. If you were able to just have no really bias in the conversation and just sit down with him one-on-one, he has lived an incredibly unique life.
But I do want to just harbor on this for a little bit longer, because and not to get too political, but it's a really interesting debate, the security versus freedom. And in the House debates on this topic, things were brought up like, oh, we could have avoided past tragedies if we lowered the requirements for these agencies to collect information. And I see that as a really dangerous and slippery slope. Right after 9/11 happened, there's the passage of the Patriot Act. And if we see that this one section of the FISA law has been violated 300,000 times, you can only imagine the amount of violation that the Patriot Act has come to see. And look, our generation is the first one that has spent a significant, arguably a majority of their lifetime online. And we do not yet understand the implications of trading our digital freedom and our digital privacy. And this is something to really be focused on and to be very wary of, most certainly.
I'm with you on that, Zach. I mean, again, I think that Assange represents kind of someone fighting for freedom in an age where people really don't trust the government. And while I think this was a tie-breaking vote this time around, probably 10 years ago, it would have not been a tie-breaking vote. It would have passed overwhelmingly. And perhaps in 5 years, we can hope politicians are going to strike it down. Yeah.
Well said.
And in our last topic, have some interesting numbers around SpaceX. And I know, Felipe, you sent us a video that we can put in the show notes. But do you want to give us some more information around what SpaceX is up to?
Sure. So some of us have heard of SpaceX's Starship launching, which will be the largest rocket ever launched. Well, it has launched. I think it's almost successfully gone to low orbit. There's a lot of technicalities if it was successful or not, but it will be the largest rocket once it finally gets up and running to all the different orbits around Earth and to the moon and presumably to Mars ever created, brought Americans to the moon, or for some of the conspiracy theorists, supposedly brought Americans to the moon. But I mean, this is a really special rocket. I think we get usually very confused when people throw technical jargons of, oh, it will send 10,000 tons of or 8 tons of thrust and it will create this much more payload. So trying to dumb it down in terms of what this thing actually does and what it will enable humans in the future to do. So far, Elon Musk has launched Starship version 1. He came out this past week or 2 weeks ago with version 2 and version 3. Version 2 will have 15% more thrust, and then version 3, which will be launching in around 2 years, will be able to launch double the amount of payload to space, and it will have around it will be $2 to $3 million per launch, which is actually crazy cheap in terms of sending things to space. So to give you an idea, per kilo to send intercontinentally to another continent by plane, it costs 50 cents to $1. With Starship version 3, it will cost around $2 to $4 per kilo. So it will only cost around 4 times more than what we currently cost to send something to another continent. The version 3 will presumably be sent to the moon, then Mars, and as Elon Musk has described, it will be able to colonize our whole solar system. And I just think that this is crazy. I mean, we all grew up with most people being able to at least travel once in their life, another continent, if you're in the middle class in America. Now, with this technology and the trajectory we're going with version 3 and beyond, our children when they turn 18, are going to have trips to space to visit it. And that's just going to be part of the human experience. And I think that this is an amazing story, an amazing hope for humanity. And one thing that I've always been wondering is, with such good news on the horizon, all I've ever heard about Starship, Elon Musk, his rival Bezos, and Richard Branson is, oh, they're just sending rich people to space. When you look at the numbers, this is soon going to be a reality for middle class people to go to space. And this is an incredible bit of news. So yeah, I think that this is just an awesome topic that we should all be excited about going into the future.
Spring break on the moon is going to be out of this world.
Oh, absolutely.
3 things on this. One, to put the numbers into context. Felipe mentioned that Elon Musk is projecting, again, we'll see, that the Starship loss are going to cost $2 million per launch. For context, the shuttle, which is the flagship U.S. space program after the Apollo mission, the shuttles is what we likely think of when we think of spacecrafts, a big white, almost panda-looking spaceship that used to go up. That cost $450 million per launch. Now we're talking about 2. So it's orders of magnitude cheaper. And if you can expect that trend to continue increasing, one can only imagine the cost savings that are going to be going. That's point 1. Point 2, as Felipe mentioned, the payload costs. How much does it cost to put a kilogram of material into space? Traditionally, with the space shuttle, it costs $18,500 for 1 kilogram. With the Falcon 9, 2,000 per kilogram. With the Falcon Heavy, 1,400 per kilogram. So what does this mean? This means that this now democratizes the ability to put things into space for more academic institutions, for more research institutions, for more private companies, and for more governments. And the third thing that this highlights is the importance of the public-private partnership, especially as it relates to aerospace. These improvements and advancements, which frankly can be largely attributed to one company, is spectacular. I don't see a world in which these advancements could have been made if space was still a solely publicly administered area and industry. So kudos to not only the private businesses that have taken a real risk in putting their hat into the space race, but also to the public officials that have ceded some of their power, which can be very difficult to get government leaders to do, that have ceded some of their power to these private institutions for the good of humanity as a whole.
I don't know if it was out of the goodness of their heart that they gave it to SpaceX. If you read the stories, SpaceX, they essentially did it on their own, these launches, and the whole point was if they could get one launch to take off and land and become a reusable rocket, then the company would start getting contracts because they would have done what no other company in the space industry had been able to do and reduce the price to where it was impossible for the government to not take them up on their offer.
Yeah,
So,
they had to your point,
I don't
they
know.
had to change the
That to
world
me
first.
seems like it's, a little bit
I hear you.
of the doubt here.
I
you
do
guys hear me?
think that there's a risk of making the government out to be, or government actors to be boogeymen. And I think that there's a lot of people that have their career at NASA working for the government that truly want to see space advancements in space, and they're willing to work with outside individuals. Yes, to your point, I mean, the most recent Walter Isaacson, Elon Musk book does a great job of diving deep into the genesis of SpaceX and how many times they were tinkering. They would have maybe one more launch with their budget, and if they did improve it, they wouldn't unlock this government funding, which they needed to survive. So it's really quite an incredible story about how they started and became to survive. I hear you, Felipe, in that their hand was largely forced because the innovation was so massive that it becomes harder and harder to ignore. But I do want to give a nod to the people that have spent their careers at NASA that have made efforts to create inroads with industry and haven't gate kept the aerospace world like it has been previously.
Yeah.
The numbers on how many they've done, SpaceX, 333 total launches, 297 total landings, and 267 total reflights. So, I mean, what a beautiful business they have is they not only get government contracts, but they're also sending up Starlinks basically every single trip, and that's becoming a huge revenue stream for them. But also what I wanted to talk about is if Mars travel is available to us in about, let's say, 10 years. 10 years time, we're 10 years into our careers, whatever we may choose, and that option is available for $100,000. Get up and go to Mars. Would you guys do it?
Can I come back?
You can come back,
Okay, yeah, why not?
but not for like 10 years.
Oh,
No.
well then maybe not. I mean, 10 years
It's
from
a
now.
commitment.
Okay. I mean, I think that this opens us up to a really fun conversation, which is what are the future implications of that we may or may not live to see. I mean, as you said, Felipe, air travel is now commercially available to everybody and probably has been for the majority of our listeners' lives, but that didn't used to be the case. I remember seeing photos of my family when they would go on flights a long time ago, and they're all dressed in suits, and it was like a very big special thing. And now people go on flights all the time and don't think anything differently of it. The future of space travel appears to be similar. Space tourism, deep space mining, getting energy sources off Earth and bringing it back. It has environmental implications. I mean, the possibilities are really endless. And I think that there's a reason why, for generations, people, especially young people, have looked up to the stars and thought, wow, I wonder what's out there. And now to have the very real possibility that it can be open not only to humans, but to a wide variety of humans within our lifetime is something to be very grateful and excited about.
Yeah.
Agreed. I do think that going to Mars, there's going to need to be a big reason for people to go. Like you think about Europeans traveling to America, there's a huge push factor of, oh, they didn't have freedom of religion and they were being treated very poorly. Like, why would an everyday citizen of America go to Mars? Would it just be out of curiosity? Like, why would that happen?
Oh, I mean, it's also so exciting because since Magellan and Columbus and there used to be expansion and not everything on Earth used to be understood. But maybe that's what takes people to space. Maybe it can be the Wild West again, and you go and you set up your own little world in space. You explore space. Like, I think that there's, at least in young men, a little seed in our mind that's like, go out and explore and conquer new territories. And this is such an awesome example of the ability to do that.
There's a bunch of different possibilities of why you would go to Mars. Maybe there's a critical resource in the future that's necessary, whatever it might be. Only one. It has to be one big reason, and there's like a million big reasons that can happen, and people will start going. I mean, but whoever goes to Mars initially, it's going to suck. I mean, it's not,
Yeah.
it's going to be
People are going to die.
yeah. I mean, just like people going to the New World, it was horrible. I mean, there were all types of disease. There was nothing here. You had to build everything. But I mean, this is the future of humanity. It's an expansion. It's some for the first time, I think in, I mean, hundreds of years, we found new frontier to go through. I don't know.
So exciting.
That's so cool. I do agree though that it will take something, whatever that something is, but it might just be out of curiosity. There's gonna be the same Columbus types of people out of 7 billion that are gonna say, hey, sign me up. I'll ship it out to Mars to see what's out there.
But even shorter term though, I mean, you don't have to think about Mars. I mean, going to
The moon.
going to the moon. I mean, that's going to be so popular in the future. You can already see it of just the idea of seeing your own planet from afar, seeing the ecology, how fragile, how small it is in relation to the cosmos. I mean, that in itself is just one reason for the short term. And once we master that route, then you start talking about the next route, which is to Mars. And then there's something even better or greater doing that trip. So, yeah.
And
It only takes 3 days to get to the moon by spacecraft. Wow, that's going to be so popular.
so NASA's Artemis project, they say that their timeline for going back to the moon is as early as next year, 2025.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's to the fact that we haven't put any humans on the moon since the 60s is quite crazy. And I think that that's really the first step in what Felipe is talking about, which is the future of the moon. And then once you have, what if the moon is like a launching pad for further deeper space explorations? And then maybe it's more attainable to get to Mars. And then Mars becomes this launching pad for the next thing. And it's just the possibilities are incredibly exciting and incredibly limitless, rather. It also just poses a lot of questions from the capitalistic point of view, which is, okay, if there's going to be all this tourism on the moon, who owns the moon? Who has the rights to sell the real estate on the moon?
Yeah, I mean, it still comes down to the fact it costs as much as somebody is willing to spend. So if it's a sought after commodity, then those prices are going to go up. But
Yeah.
right now it's not claimed. It's exactly like how America was founded. People were just claiming land. They're like, this is my land, and if you
Yeah.
want to pay me for it, so be it. This is the price.
You have to make a claim and then defend it.
Yeah.
And maybe, I mean, we saw the launch of Space Force, and I think at first everybody was like, Space Force, that kind of sounds like a joke. But within this context, it makes sense. If you have interest to defend in space, you need a military power that's capable of doing that.
Yeah. And besides all that, before we wrap, I mean, this is a story that is so exciting and it's crazy that when people talk about Elon Musk or talking about the future, it's always kind of this doomsday scenario. Oh, there's too much free speech. Oh, someone owns Twitter. Oh my gosh, TikTok. Like the world's coming to an end, the environment. But you don't get a lot of stories like this. And so I think it's important that we bring this up and something to be excited for in the future. I mean, I can't think of many things that is highlighted in the news of people being super excited for in the coming decade, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And
To make a counterpoint, I have a question for you guys. Growing up, I would go to space camp at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, and I remember coming back one year, and I was at a neighborhood party, and one of my neighbors said, "Space? What are we going to do in space when we have all this suffering on Earth? Why is the government spending all this money on space when we have so many problems here?" And I remember as a kid, I was like, "Oh, I don't have a great response to that." I think the response now would be there's so much innovation that can happen in space that will benefit people here on Earth. And it's such an aspirational thing to drive the fate and the destiny of humanity forward that it's something we're obligated to do for our children. But I'm curious how you guys see that, because I do understand a little bit of the logic of, hey, there's a lot of people that are suffering here that we could maybe use these resources to help.
I don't know. I think I heard Freeberg and All In say this, where you kind of distribute your resources 85% to the short term, like you can fix right away pretty easily, 10% to a little bit longer term, a little bit more difficult to tackle issues, and then 5% you do it to the long shots. I mean, that same argument could be given to Queen Isabel when she gave Columbus the 3 boats to explore the West. You have a bunch of poor people in Spain. I mean, Spain was poor in the 1400s. I mean, people are probably living less than $1 a day in today's terms. Probably spent those resources in expensive boats to take care of the poor in Spain. But no, you gave it to Columbus, these 3 boats. It's expensive. It's a lot of resources. He, quote unquote, discovered, okay, there were people there, whatever. He reintegrated humanity together by bringing Spaniards to America. And I mean, we all now live in this incredible country and are in like kind of the cradle of innovation in the world. So I don't know. That argument to me doesn't seem like it historically matches up, right?
what I'll say to that is I think that naturally humans have a propensity towards curiosity. And the greatest inventions in all of history, companies, products, markets, places, all of these things stemmed from one person being a little curious about it. So if we're not able to just show that curiosity and be able to explore a new idea, then that's when we're doomed. If we just think, oh, we're okay with what we have and we have so many problems, let's just keep on banging our heads against a wall, then no growth occurs. It all stems from curiosity.
I agree. And from a positive point of view and seeing a brighter future. And to your point, Felipe, what a great and positive subject to bring up. And I'm happy that we're highlighting.
It's a beautiful topic, and I'm sure one that we will come back to. But for this episode, number 25, that is all we have. We hope you have a great rest of your weekend. And next week, we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.